you're going to be revved up this morning because I'm talking about something really interesting, a subject that most of us don't think about, but we are in part aware. And it's about elementals. So I'm talking this morning about what elementals are. We're told that there are elemental intelligences of nature, and that this nature that we'll be talking about this morning is divided into two divisions. The first division is the elements of dense matter. That's the first division. The second division is what perhaps we're going to be more interested in. The second division is the higher, what's called the higher counterpoint or counterpart of nature. And this higher counterpart exists in a finer substance. And it's this finer substance from which we gather knowledge and information. And this knowledge and information is from the mentalities or the intelligences of fire, earth, air, and water. What is interesting is that in our own bodies, we have a composition of these elements. And if our consciousness is pure enough and contains enough psychic energy, it is possible to contact these elementals. Now that might sound a little strange. Well, let me give you a story. A few months ago, I was at our local health food store to pick up some supplements, and I was having an issue. And the store owner said, well, just talk to your body. All you have to do is just, quiet yourself and talk to your body. Well, what she was really talking about, but probably didn't know it, is to have a conversation with these elementals that form part of our bodies. But in order to do that, we must be pure enough and we must have enough psychic energy to make this contact. Because our own bodies are composed of these elements, there is a law of attraction, a resonance that can allow a conscious relationship to occur between our consciousness and these elementals. These elementals of finer substance have a wisdom, they have information to share with us as our sensitivity increases. Isn't this interesting? Yeah, I just love the idea. Now, here's a verse from one of the Upanishads, and this is what it says: to the God who is in the fire and who is in the waters, to the God who has suffused himself through all the world, to the God who is in summer plants and in the lords of the forest, to that God be adoration. The Tibetan Djwhal Khul says this: when the few who are the true esoteric students of the world know the difference between etheric and astral forms, between mental clairaudience and clairvoyance, and their astral parts, between the elementals of thought and the elementals of nature, then will the Christ and his church have a real esoteric group on the physical plane, and the outer organizations will then receive the needed stimulation. Now, for those of you that have Alice Bailey books, you can find this quote in Externalization of the Hierarchy, page 513. But I do want to remind you, this was written a long time ago. And since that time, there are now more disciples on the planet, esoteric students on the planet. We're told that back in the day would have been in the early 1900s up through about 1935 to 1940, we had maybe 300 to 500 true disciples around the world. And now, today, we have thousands. So if we think about these thousands disciples, and that these thousands of disciples now know about the difference between their etheric form and their astral form, and that they have enough psychic energy in them now that they are in communication with these elementals of life, particularly the higher elementals. This is going to greatly enhance their groups and the labor that these groups have been, what's the word? I'm trying to think of this word. Positioned into the plan with, so that this enables them, this understanding, this contact with the elementals creates a relationship with the finer substance of nature, puts us in deeper contact with the plan of hierarchy, the plan of Sanat Kumara, to actually bring more of that plan into manifestation, into existence. Okay, you get it? For those of you that are on the webinar, you should see everybody just sitting here looking at me. Anyway, there are elementals of the personality also. These elementals, esoterically, are called lunar lords, for they are of the involutionary system and must be taken control over by our unfolding human soul. There are also elemental intelligences of the mineral kingdom. In my studies, I have learned that some of these mineral kingdom elemental intelligences live in the interspaces of rock. There is a pundit that I met once who is known to speak to these intelligences, a fellow here in Prescott. He gained knowledge from them and then presented what he learned in lectures. Isn't that interesting? There are elementals also called gnomes, who at a certain stage in their development are normally very selfish, whose nature can vary from being playful and impish to that of playing pranks. In one study, we are told that the less intelligent gnome is quite an imitator. For example, there was a gnome a person saw who was wearing ancient spectacles and who held a goose quill pin. An ink horn was attached to his belt and a doctor's headdress. Now, this was when I was in Findhorn and I was talking to this fellow that was able to communicate with these gnomes, and he described this little fella to the T. And what was so cool is that he took some of us out into the woods and we saw this gnome. Can you imagine what an experience that was? Some of my experiences have given me some limited but similar experiences that were described in a book called The Dayspring of Youth. And although the differences were that the author loved these little gray-bearded fellows, my own experiences did not find me so comfortable when I came upon them unexpectedly. One day, visiting a friend in her home, she complained how it was time for her to move. For after calling forth a couple of these gnomes, they would play impish games with her electric lights, turning them on and off, sometimes shutting off the electricity to her refrigerator. They became a nuisance. And unfortunately, this nuisance began to cause her to be off balance psychologically. As she talked about these little creatures, I was sure she had flipped. Until I too saw them using her home as a playground. It was their playground. However, eventually she did move out of her home into an apartment, but they continued to hang around her. And she was never really the same well-balanced person that I had once known her to be. We know that there are different kinds of does this sound way off? Well, good. You can think about something new then, because it's very factual. So we know that there are different kinds of gnomes. For example, some are eavesdroppers. They like to learn from humans. And they also like children. The higher level gnome will oftentimes become playmates to these young children, especially those who love to be out in nature and sit in trees, or even the little ones that are lonesome. We are told that sometimes, due to some earlier lifetime, when you evoke them by the use of white magic, the gnome will, by the law of attraction, return to that person later, in later lifetimes, to remind him of his earlier abilities. Now you might ask, how old are these gnomes? They can live for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years old. We are told in the Ageless Wisdom that many monuments left by ancient civilizations are the graven images of elemental forces. Someday I will share more about the lower and higher types of nature's elementals, but for now I want to focus on something a little bit more practical, the elementals of our physical, emotional, and mental bodies. These are elementals which our human soul must gain control over. It is the activities of these elementals of our physical and emotional and mental bodies which require those of us on the spiritual path to undertake certain disciplines if we want to gain control, especially over the lunar lords, those involutionary elementals. And why is this? Well, over the centuries of incarnations, we have introduced various activities into our lives, such as desires and urges and various wishes that planted ideas or planted seeds of ideas which then accumulated over time and sprouted in ways that went against the archetypal or archetypal purpose of our physical, emotional, and mental bodies. Now, in order for us to advance spiritually and take a next step in our evolution, we must begin to eliminate those unwholesome seeds. Now, these seeds we could call glamours and illusions. We need to first create, however, a positive relationship with our three bodies. When we create this positive relationship, then we make contact with the intelligence of these lunar lords. For intelligence they do have. We are told that in all substance that there lies an intelligence that replies to the resonance of their requests. Remember, in everything there rests an absolute presence, such as what I read from the Upanishads. So I'm going to read that again. To the God who is in the fire and who is in the waters, to the God who has suffused himself throughout the world, to the God who is in summer plants and in the lords of the forest, to that God be adoration. Adoration. This verse is a reminder for us not to hate our body, not to hate our emotional nature or the nature of our mind, but to give it love and respect. For example, if you want someone to listen to you, to take your advice, the first thing you must do is what? To gain their respect. We're in a society today that loves to give advice. And the unfortunate part of this is if they have not yet gained our respect, we're not going to listen to that advice. And another unfortunate aspect of this whole issue is that we habitually learn how to tune ourselves off or out to people who give us advice. It's just, it's like a, what could we say? It's like a default, that our brain defaults into, saying, oh no, here goes, this is just like mom, this is just like dad, this is just like that teacher. They all try to give me advice, and I'm an independent person. I don't need to listen to that advice. See, the same thing happens with our bodies. See, these elementals at one point in their evolution with us was giving us really, really good advice. But as we began to accumulate our own ideas and concepts and opinions, they then begin to absorb those same ideas and concepts and opinions to the point that we blocked out their purity from our own impurity. So, to gain control, for us to gain control over their ways, we first have to let them know that we really do care for them. and respect the jobs that they have been given to do. We must also realize that we have not trained them very well over the series of our incarnations. As they continue to build our bodies from one life to another, we have just not gained respect. We have not given them respect. And so now we have to stop, become aware that these elementals of our body have intelligences. We need to gain their respect and put them into a discipline. It's like parents to their teenagers, how parents used to give their teenagers certain disciplines. Key word is used to. And now we can't do that anymore. I'm speaking generally, of course, because the children are rebelling. They do whatever they want, and the parents that want them to love their children, to love them, say, oh, okay, it's okay, honey. Do whatever you want, and that way you know I love you. But it's like our solar angel is to us, parents are to their children. You know, we're going to teach them certain disciplines to gain control over those lunar lords, over those involutionary elementals that we have shown disrespect to for such a long time. So if you are a grandparent, what you want to do is sit down and talk to the parents. Put this story in a way that they'll listen to you. It doesn't sound so science fiction. And say, this is what your job is. You know, to give disciplines to your children so they respect their bodies, their minds, their emotions. When we do this, we're helping not only these elementals to evolve, but ourselves as well. Now we have cooperation going on. For example, let's consider the elemental of our mental body, the substance from which we create our thoughts. The specific purpose of a thought form is connected very closely with the type of elemental which we can control. If your thoughts are made of beauty, for example, then you are drawing to yourself the substance of the higher mind. And in that way, gaining control over the lunar lords, over these involutionary forces. And in this process, we are slowly changing their nature. If you're on Facebook, and if you're on my own Facebook, which is under my name, I've posted 2 really, really good statements about negative thought forms and how to overcome negative thought forms. Now you're going to see I didn't bring anything up about elementals, or the substance, higher substance or lower substance of nature. Just really practical ideas about how you can gain control and help these elementals actually come under the control of your soul, your unfolding human soul. So if you haven't gone to that my Facebook page for a couple of days, go there and read it. It's very substantial. So what can we do to discipline the elemental of our mental body and change its consciousness? You can ask yourself questions as you gain experience through the process of self-observation. These are questions that have come, that I found in a book called A Treatise on Cosmic Fire by Alice Bailey. So let me give you the list of these questions. The first question is to ask ourselves, again, we're dealing with the elemental of the mental body. The first question, in what type of matter do I usually formulate my thoughts? We could have a class on this. It's so fascinating. Oh, if we think about the lower division of nature with these involutionary elementals or lunar lords, from which we have trained over many, many of our incarnations. These are the lunar lords that throw us into negative thinking. So that's why we want to become really good observers, to monitor, become aware of our thinking mechanism. And the minute we catch ourselves in any negative frame of mind, that we change that negative thought into positive. But one of the things I have learned, and I sort of alluded to that on my Facebook, is that as you are in the process of changing this negative thought form into positive, you also want to juxtapose it with an image, a positive image. Now, how you do that is, and this is, to me, I've learned, so it's not a theory or a hypothesis, is that you want to have a certain list of positive images in your head that are images of joy. These images should be of yourself. Pictures, photographs that you have of yourself that someone took when you were a little girl or a little boy, and you were so cute and happy and loving and excited about life. That's one of those images. You can have another image when you were like a teenager, and then when you were in your 20s or 30s or 40s, all representing different stages of your life in which you were joyful and successful. Those images are more powerful than thoughts that have been made up with words and sentences. See what I'm saying? And if you cannot eradicate that negativity, that negative thinking, then music. Have certain selections of music that will help remove that and change that or transform that negative thought form. So here you are with this image of yourself when you were experiencing success and joy, and that image is part of you. And you're juxtaposing that with music of whatever choice, but it's got to be, don't let it be jazz, or rock and roll, and preferably music without words, just melodies and harmonies and so forth. Because typically music with words are emotional, and it evokes, emotional memories. So it's better just to have notes. Try this. So, back to this question, in what type of matter do I usually formulate my thoughts? You're starting to transform those negative conditioning thoughts, just in this way, the way I've explained it. The second question, what is the psychic quality of my thought forms? Is it radiatory? Is it beautiful? Is it harmonious? Is it creative? Or is it destructive and hateful and revengeful? Number 3, with what specific purpose do I use mental matter? Okay, it's like creating this lecture this morning. Yeah, knowing that this is a very different subject matter, how am I going to approach this? And people won't think like I thought of my friend that she had flipped out. You know, okay, so you present the idea and then you put it into a way, this lecture into a way that makes sense, that we ourselves can relate to it. But now we see what the underlying cause is, in part to negative thinking. Why are some people more negative than others? How can someone go through a crisis and learn from it when with others it destroys the rest of their life? Number 4, do I work in mental matter consciously or unconsciously? If we work unconsciously, then that mental elemental is taking control and we behave mechanical. It's very interesting once you learn the difference between a person who is creative and is an original thinker to people who speak mechanically. From my observation is most people speak mechanically when they're tired, when they're just not thinking, and they say the stupidest things. And here I am, a trained observer, a trained thinker, and I give all this energy and credence to what they're saying, and then wait. This makes no sense. They're just speaking mechanically. Hey, when a person speaks mechanically, it becomes a dud. If you've ever played tennis and you've always wanted to buy the very, very best tennis balls because they have the most bounce, and then sometimes you get a dud, you drop it on the ground and it doesn't bounce back up. That's mechanical thinking. It's a dud. It's stupid. The 5th question, do I vitalize my thought forms with a high or a low order of entity? Do I vitalize my thought forms with a high or a low order of entity? See, the higher elementals or the lunar lords. 6, do I study the laws of construction? 7, do I realize the power of the will to vitalize? 8, do I destroy thought forms when they have been accomplished, when they have accomplished their purpose by a conscious act of the will? Now we're getting into some pretty advanced disciplines, but at least you can work with it. Let me repeat this. Do I destroy thought forms when they have accomplished their purpose by a conscious act of the will? See, if we don't, then that stays with us. And it can mix with negativity and dwell on forever and ever and ever, see, in our thinking process. Number 9, do I make forms which bring karmic effects, or do I build those which go to the good of the group? So, for example, an incident took place in your group of which you were involved in, and you dwell on that week after week, month after month, year after year, and you sit down and you have a conversation with that group member in which there is a word found in that conversation that triggers the karmic effect of that incident. And they bring it up, and they talk about it, and talk about it, and talk about it. And what's happening is it's like it builds on itself. It is a thought form that builds on itself and becomes bigger and bigger. It's like when I was a kid, and I'm sure you were there too, but I grew up in Iowa when it was snowbound and lived on Burlington Street. I love the name of that, Burlington Street. It's very poetic. Anyway, we had, I'm not Burlington, Barrett Street. There goes my brain. Okay, Barrett Street. You know, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And so I lived on this hill a street called Barrett Street. And in the snow, we would start with, creating a little snowball. And then we'd start at the top of the street and go down the street and made it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until the bottom of the street, we had the base of our snowman. Okay, so this is what happens with these thought forms. If we don't destroy that thought form, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And in becoming bigger, it's taking control over our thinking and our emotions. So again, the question, do I make forms which bring karmic effects, or do I build those which go to the good of the group? This type of questioning is very advanced. If you can do these things, your consciousness will not only gain control over the mental elemental, you will also transform the various glamours and illusions which the elemental has been influencing, with which the elementals have been influencing the actions of your emotions and thinking. Some people think they're different bodies, name their different bodies in order to relate to them more objectively and in a more detached sense. For example, there was a mom whose youngest son was entering into his teen years, and he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. The mom decided one day to call his emotional body Grumpy George. So during those times that he was struggling with his anger and frustrations, she would just call him Grumpy George. And that way kept his sweet self intact. It helped him to recognize that aspect of himself, and not identify with it, but to see it as something under his control. You see, you can say, "Dear Grumpy George, I am your friend. You seem to be having an off day. Let me help you a bit." Perhaps this seems a little childlike, but believe me, it is the elementals of our bodies that cause us to behave so childishly or in mechanical ways. What you are doing is appealing to the intelligence aspect in that elemental. Remember that in the beginning, the elementals did their job with perfection. It was our behaviors that led them astray. So now we have to create a better relationship with them, demonstrate that we love them, and change their nature. You see, each elemental has rights. Each elemental has rights, and when we violate its rights, that little elemental gets angry. When, for example, you put drugs into your body, you are interfering with its job. The ageless wisdom teaches us that elementals function through the etheric webs in our body. When we violate their rights, for example, by forcing our body to work overtime or to waste itself, we are interfering with its job. And in the light of cause and effect, in reality, we are damaging ourselves. So let us discover. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to get through this. Let's just discover, let's just say that you have a particular fear. And this fear is controlling you. And you want to eliminate this fear. If you eliminate this fear, you will be taking charge, taking control over, or helping the emotional elemental. I'm going to skip through some of what I have here so I can make us all feel like we've come to an end. Okay, we are told that worries, anxieties, and tension places extra pressure on our body. Meditation helps our body to become healthy. When we get sick, our body is telling us that it is what? It's unhappy. Sickness, illness, pain, and so forth are ways that our body tells us that it is not happy with the way we are treating it. I was thinking how so many children, when they leave home and go out into the world, think, all right, I'm no longer under the control of my parents. I can do anything I want to do. And with such a non-discriminating attitude, they lead themselves into problems. We do the same thing with our bodies. We have to learn to take better care of ourselves. Our elementals then can support us in a way where we can have higher spiritual experiences, where we can leave our body and travel in space. Most people laugh at such things, but they are very real. The reason they laugh is that they think it can only happen in science fiction, or that because they have never had such an experience, then it's not possible. Each body has what we term a king elemental, but there are also others. Some of the elementals are advanced, such as the king elemental, but others are not. Some have problems which they share with us. If you begin to observe your physical, emotional, and mental body, you will have a greater opportunity to control these elementals and learn its moods. If you have an advanced elemental, it will help you with your creative activities. Some people call that advanced elemental their muse. Whatever creative activities you have, when this muse or advanced elemental is working with you, there is no limitation to your creativity. Your visions will come into and plans will come into incarnation exactly as you conceived them. If you are an advanced being, you will attract advanced elementals to your human constitution. If, however, you are a person of a low level, you're going to attract low-level entities. Low-level entities cause us to stay on the lower planes of consciousness. But if we attract higher level entities, we can help them take initiations where they will start advancing and living on higher planes. Will you let me go over a little bit? Yeah? Okay, oh, great. If your physical elemental advances, your willpower increases. If your emotional elemental advances, your love and intuition increases. If your mental elemental advances, your light increases. What is the purpose of the human soul in relation to these elementals? The soul must refine them and make them understand each other. You are the teacher of these elementals. What are you teaching them? Ask yourself, what am I teaching? My physical elemental, emotional elemental, mental elemental. When an elemental asks you for your help, do you respond with your love and assistance? When you find yourself in a life crisis, facing a crucial life and death matter, what do? You knock on the door and you ask your solar angel to give you strength and power and light. What if your solar angel gave you drugs or told you to smoke a cigarette? Well, we would laugh at that. Of course it wouldn't. If you demand help in a real life and death situation, the solar angel is going to give you inspiration. Just like we must give inspiration to our elementals. If you are a healer, you must direct your energy to the elementals because they too can be sick. For those of you who have been taking some of our meditation courses and engaging in visualization exercises, know that through the technique of visualization, you can help these three elementals to integrate themselves, giving the soul control over them. I think I can close here. So it's a lot to think about. It's wonderful, isn't it? It is. It's exciting.